Okay, so this eyebrow is how we're going to set it up. We're going to set it up the same as this one. It's a little bit different the way this has been done. What we can have a look at is how this has been set up. This control is really no different. However, what we're doing is we're setting these up, which is exactly the same sort of system we've used for everywhere else in the face. So we'll set those up on the other side to make sure they're correct. But the difference being is that I am actually wiring to X and Y only. I haven't actually hooked up the Z axis, and we probably should, so I can pull it in and out as well. The way it's done with the X and Y, though, is X right now has been wired to it with a couple multipliers. So depending on whether we're going positive here, you'll see that this control here is moving slower than when I go the other way. And I'm actually multiplying them both a fair bit down, so by 0.1 and by 0.3. Same on the other side, except inversely. And then what I'm doing is I've actually put a list controller on the Y-axis, wired the Y, and then I'm actually affecting the weight of it with a wire as well. So let's go and try it on the other side, and you'll see where I'm going with this. Again, let's set up the groups so that we're grouped correctly. And I'm going to say don't affect children. And in this case, I didn't actually align them to any other orientation to start with, and then directly to the control. So in XYZ orientation only. And then, of course, then we group both of them so that they have a parent that's aligned to them. And those will still be parented down to the end control here, the main control of the head, so that when when the head moves, they move, obviously. The eye control itself is just parented down to the same point helper down there. And now what we need to do is we need to go in and actually connect these up. Let's do the Y first, because that's the more complex one. I'm going to set list controllers on both these, as I always do. And what we're going to do is we're going to start off with a more complex one. We can go back to the X and do that next, but let's actually do the Y for this. Now what we need to do here is in the Y, we're actually going to assign a new controller. We're going to say a float list. So now what we've got is a list controller nested inside a list controller. The reason I'm doing it this way is that the list controller has a weight available to it. So I can actually weight the amount on and off, which is the nice part. So you can actually take the tracks and affect the weights of them. I'm going to leave the first one as it is, and I'm going to connect up to the available track. The reason I'm going to do that, and not just to this one, is that I've found instances where if you ramp a list controller down to 0 and there's no input coming from it, it's just 0, it kind of causes some issues sometimes. So again, I always like to start on the second track in this case and leave this one for adjustments if I had to. So what I'm going to do is go to wire and wire the available track of the list controller that's on the Y position to the Y position on the animation track, and I'm going to connect it so that now it goes up and down directly. Same thing on the other side. I'm going to go and do exactly the same thing. Sorry, we need to add the list controller to start with, so we'll go in and add the float list, and now we can say at available track again back to here. So what we have now is just a 1-to-1. Go up and down. It doesn't matter if we go sideways at this point. Nothing else is happening. So now what we need to do is we need to connect it up inversely, so that when we slide it side to side, it actually weights this in the other direction. Now what some people don't realize is that list controllers can actually have a negative weight to them, and will actually start pushing them in the other direction in some cases. On things like constraints, it won't work. It'll just ramp them off. But in the case of Bezier float controllers, 200% weight on that track will actually multiply the value of that float by 200%. And inversely, if it's negative 200, it'll be negative values. So what we can do now is we're going to take the weight of this controller, which is down here, and we're going to wire it up to the X position side to side. So let's do animation Y weights. There's the float wire. And let's take this into the X animation track. And now what we want to say is when this is positive, we're going to ramp that down into the negative. So I'm going to just take the X position and copy it just so I can use it that way and say if X position is greater than or equal to 0, then else. So if it's greater than, we're going to be ramping down. Else it's going to be 1. And the weight of the tracks is actually a value of 1. It reads as 100 here, but your input value is 1. So now what you need to do is you need to go in and we're going to take this, we're going to say 1 minus the X position. And see what that does for us. So as we go up and sideways, you can see as I go out and start pushing it out, it actually starts ramping down the weight of the controller to the point where it actually ramps it into a negative value the further over I get. If I bring it into the negative value, you can see that it's now sticking with it 1 to 1. Once I get onto the negative side of the X, it's 1 to 1. And then as I push it past into the positive side, it starts ramping down the value of the controller to the point where it is, at this point here, actually set up as, it's weighted that controller to 0. As I push past that point, it starts taking it into a negative value and actually pushing it the opposite direction. So now you can have this nice fluid motion set up. Let's just copy that if statement. And what I'll do now is I'm just going to close a couple of these. And what I'll do is I'll do the same thing to this one. And we're going to say the Y's weight of the float is going to be connected up to the X position again. And this time what I need to do is I need to invert it so it's the other way around and connect it. And what you'll find is it's actually the wrong way around. See, as I'm actually going to the negative right now, it's actually pushing it up even higher. It's not what I want. It should be going the other way. So what you need to do is you need to multiply the X value by -1. And I'll just wrap that in a set of brackets as well. So we just need to change that one around. So now when I pull it this way, it actually pulls the outer side of the brow down. Pull it this way, it pulls the inner side of the brow down. Now you've got this nice fluid motion going on your control. So pull it over. I can pull down the inner, get him to frown even more by pushing the outer up, make him look really evil, not just a frown sort of brow. Pull it straight across, the whole brow drops, and then as you pull it further over the side, it starts pushing up the inner more and more and more. So very, very fluid motion to it once you start playing with it. Now for the X value, if we wanted to set that up like I have on this side, what I'll do is I'll just go in and say properties and just copy that expression. And let's do the same thing over here. So on this side, I'm going to take the X value, and I don't need a list controller on it this time like I did with the Y. Hook it directly up to it. And check and see if this is indeed what we want. So when I go into the... No, this is completely inverted. So when it's greater than, I want it to move very little. And when it's less than X, less than 0 and X, I want it to move to the 0.3. So we've got if X position is greater than or equal to 0, then do this. Else do that. So it's pretty straightforward to write that if statement. And now of course on the other side, so we can take the other side, do exactly the same thing. We can take the X value and wire it into the X position, and this time the greater than or less than side will just be inverted like the way that I'd taken it from the other side. So if the x position is less than 0, then multiply it by 0.1. So if it's going this direction, multiply it by 0.1. If it's greater than, then multiply it by 0.3. So now what you've got is a bit of stretch happening side to side. I'm not sure if that's entirely necessary. We'd have to take a look at it. But it kind of adds a nice fluid motion to it. How it really sort of helps stretch the brow into a direction too. Again, it may not be necessary. We could, we could play with ways of ramping that value on and off with another control. So you could turn, the animator could have the choice of turning it on and off. There's, it's pretty much, at the next stage, it's unlimited what you can do for setup and what you want to add. It's all a matter of time and how much control you're going to put in. And once we go around and add the controls, individual controls, well, the animator could go grab each control on the brow and do it one at a time if they wanted. I'm not sure that's going to be necessary. This looks pretty fluid and quite a nice fluid way of working. So they may not need to do that in that part of the eye. So next we're going to deal with the lower lid down here. Probably set up the same sort of thing. Looks like it probably would work pretty nicely to have a similar sort of motion going. The lower part of the area, this doesn't need to move as much, so it's not really as important. In that case, I'm not sure again if it's needed. Maybe we just need the individual controls on them. Is what we do. So maybe we'll just stick with those. It's a matter of sort of playing around with it and figuring out how many controls do you need for this main set. Right now we've got 8 for the mouth and 2 for the brows. And we're going to need some an upper and lower lid control as well for the eyebrows. So for our top layer control set, that might be actually enough. I might actually also just stick one on the nose too for the top level control set. And then the finite control set will have a control over every single joint. The other one that we need is a jawbone. And I was going to do that last and set that up. It's going to take some fiddling around to get the constraints and everything working the way we're going to need for that. So next, let's deal with the eyes next. I've now hooked up the eye and got it working. So I've also taken it out of the see-through mode just so you can have a better idea of what's actually happening now. Got the nice eyebrow motion. Almost looks like the skin somehow sticks to the control. The eyelid now is kind of done exactly the same way, except we have rotations connected up and not positions. And so you can see that I can slide it back and forth and get angles to the top lid. Now we need to work on the weighting a whole lot because it's obviously pulling through, but we can get some pretty interesting eye shapes from this just by pulling on the one control. And then we've got a control on the bottom that does exactly the same thing for the bottom lid. It allows us to be able to pull it back and forth, and you'll be able to see how it's controlling the bones in a minute. Of course, you can also close it up, and we'll be able to do blinks with the be able to pull those two down, one on top of another. I also decided to put one underneath the eye, just playing with it. It looked like it was quite nice. I can be able to shove it up, underneath the sort of the cheek area up underneath, and in conjunction with the this one here, it could do a nice job of sort of getting the face to crunch up around underneath the eye area. I also went and colored the controls left and right like I always do with everything. So you know which ones are left and right on the face. Even if you're in wireframe, you can see where things are. So now what we're going to do is just go back to see-through on this. And we're going to set up the other eyes. So I'm going to make a copy of this. And then we're going to use our mirror position script and rotation script to make sure that it's on the other side, and that's our mirror objects here. Now we don't want to affect children because we don't want to leave this behind. So I chose the one that we're going to take the values from, the one we're going to put it to, and all we need to do is just simply run mirror objects, and it pops it on the other side. Same thing with this one down here. Take that one and that one. Mirror those over. Those ones are easy because really there's actually no rotation change on them at all because they're aligned pretty much to the viewport. This one here is a bit different. This one is actually aligned differently. It's actually rotated a bit to angle with the face a bit, and so with this one, you'll actually see that it's placing it right on the other side as the other ones did. So that's right where it's supposed to be, and that's perfect. So let's just color these right away. I'm just going to say shapes, grab all those, and I have the color left, right, and it's got a threshold area to it as well for how close it is to the center line, and that will have just gone and colored them all red. Now we don't need that anymore. So with the eye bones, let's just go back to all. With the eye bones, what we need to do is we need to group basically all of these to make sure that we're working in their local space when we deal with the rotations on each joint. So group each object. I'm just going to say a size of 5, I believe, and we'll say group, and so they're all in there. And I'm not sure those are ever parented up, so let me just parent those up to the control in the head again, the main one. Again, it could just be to the head bone. So they should all rotate with it. Now when we rotate these joints and connect these joints, we can connect them on the z-axis, and that z-axis will react as though it's local because it's been parented off to something that is aligned to it. So very similar, but what we're going to do is, again, same sort of thing. Let's go in and grab all of our bones across the top we're going to work with. I always start with we could put the list controller actually directly on the y-axis if we wanted. I always have list controllers and everything, just same reason as always. If I ever want to go back and make adjustments to things, and change their orientation or reuse this facial rig in another character, I want to be able to repurpose it. All I need to do is make sure that the first controller and that initial list controller is active, and then I can do all the changing of it I want, and it'll not affect anything else. So it's just sort of a standard I've developed for my own working habits. Develop your own. There's all kinds of ways you can use list controllers to your advantage. So now what we're going to do is we're going to wire the Z rotation into the Y movement of this object here. So again, same thing. We're going to say the Z rotation. Now what we want on this Z rotation is that list controller again, so that we can affect the weight of it. So before we go and do that again, same thing, let's go in here. I've filtered this out, by the way, to show only rotation tracks now, just to make it a bit easier. So I want the Z rotation of the animation track on all 3 of these. Assign controller. I'm going to float list into it. And then I'm going to say rotation, animation, Z rotation, and the available track again. And we're going to put that into the Y up and down. And we should just be able to connect it. And, oops, connect. And it's actually looks like it's going the opposite direction. So all these are going to have to be negative. There's the other side they weren't. This is because these were mirrored over and not actually mirrored but rotated into place. So it looks like the Z-axis, the one is actually opposite values now because it's the joint's been rotated around into place. So you can see now it's actually moving that one up and down. Now what I discovered once we got this hooked up is we're going to have to multiply the outside ones a little bit by some factor to make sure they move at the same rate. And you kind of see what I'm talking about in a minute. So rotation, animation, Z rotation available again. Again to the Y track, and this one as well. And to the Y track again. And you can see that when I pull this down, oops, we didn't invert the other two. So I'll just say invert that one. And I'll just invert this one, update. And you can see that it's sticking nicely. The center one pretty much kind of goes the right with it, but the outside ones are really, in a sense, pulling down too far. Once I pull this down, I really want these to be in a nice row. We don't want to pull the corners, once we've skinned it properly, we don't want to pull the corners of the eyes down more than we do the center. So the center's got to move more than the outsides. And I think what I discovered is that with the first one, it should be multiplied by about 0.8, and the outer one should be about 0.7, I believe, is what I ended up doing. And we can check that real easy just by going in here and 0.8 on the inside, and it should be 0.7 on the outside. So we're correct. So it should move at the same sort of rate now. So when we move it up and down, you get a nice sort of, it feels like it's an even spread moving up and down. I'm just going to use my quick align to get it aligned back up to there, or you could use the 0 position to do the same thing. So now what we need to do is exactly the same thing that we did with the eyebrows to get the fall off back and forth. So let's start with the inside one, and again we're going to go to wire, rotation, animation, this time the weight of the float wire. We're going to take that back to the X position, and we're looking at when it goes positive, we want to ramp this one down. So I'm just going to copy that. So we're going to need it elsewhere in the expression. If greater than or equal to 0, then, and I do greater than or equal to, by the way, just because you got to be careful in if statements in a wire param that you are actually returning a value. I've run into cases where if you set it up and don't put your else statement and you don't return some value in the else, you may not even need it. It may not need to do anything. However, you've got to return a value to the wire parameter or else it'll break. So I think that's why I've got into this habit, is I know that I'm covering all boundaries where I want to. And what we need then is 1 minus, and 1 is currently the value of the weight of the controller, so minus this, or just be 1, and let's see if that does what we expect. So we should be able to roll it down, and then if I move out to this side, so it's actually the opposite. It's, oh no, it's, oh, that's right. So if doing that, no, it's actually doing it right. So when we pull this one down, it's pushing that one back up and rolling it down. Now what we also want is the exact opposite. So I'm just going to copy this expression. We want the exact opposite on this side. We're going to say the weight for the float wire on the x-axis again, and let's invert that to less than, and we should have to probably invert another piece of the math as well, because now it's going down instead of going back up to its original, so we need to multiply this. So I'm just going to stick this in brackets just so it reads a bit better, times minus 1. And now it should work the way we expect. So it's pushing the outside one back up, and then when I come over here, it's pushing the outside one back up. Now what we want is we want this middle one to do a 50-50 for all intents and purposes. So same thing here. What we're going to take this is we're going to wire this, and again it's the weight of the float wire to the X. And this time, essentially, we want to multiply this by 0.5 and negative 0.5. Again, we could put that in brackets if we wanted, just to make it easier to read. And we have to take a look at whether we got it. I think we've got it right, right off the bat. So you can see when I'm over this side, we're actually getting a nice angle to those 3 top bones. And again, same with this way. We're getting a nice angle to those 3 top bones. If I'm in the middle, all 3 of the bones react the way they should. So I can even pull it up as I pull it out to the outside, I'm pushing down the inner joint and the opposite way around. So now we can get some really, really nice eyelid shapes just from one control again. And again, we could have separate controls on all of them if need be, if we decided we needed that kind of control to do what we wanted. So there's a pretty nice little setup to get it working. All we need to do now is mimic that on the bottom control. I'll do that myself because it's essentially exactly the same thing across the bottom. And all I did on this one is I set it up so that this control was parented into here so that it moves when the bottom of the very top edge of the cheek sort of moves. And then we needed to set this up. I'm just going to turn position back on here. Now we need to set this up so that it actually affects these ones. Now I've actually gone and written a little script, and I threw it in a miscellaneous script that'll come with it. You'll find it at the bottom of the miscellaneous scripts for all kinds of odds and ends. And what I did is I from object, a to object, and so we went to, that's the from to, and then what I'm doing is I'm actually connecting it up. I'm finding the first available controller in the list controller that's on this. So you can see that I've got these available tracks in the list controller. It'll find the first one of the available one. And this line here simply finds out which track number it is. So in this case it'll be 4. 1, 2, 3, 4 down. It then does a wire parameter .connect, which is how you set up a wire parameter in script. Wire parameter .connect, the to object, the from object, and then the expression. In this case, it's the track is called animation. This track here, and that's how it looks whenever we wire things together. And then what I'm doing is I'm setting the name of the controller. You can see it says Arrow CNT07. I really should have named all the controls before we went around and did it all, because what it's doing is setting up the name of each one so we know which one they're connected to. And then I'm saying display control dialog. So when we use this function, it's actually going to pop open the dialog and we can type in the math we want. So all I have to do is pick that control, pick that point helper, pick the control, run the function. It connects it all together for me and pops open a dialog. In this case, I don't want any given math on it, so I can connect that one to this one. And it's all connected up. That's simple and fast. So now when I run that, it's actually moving the bottom eyelid. So little scripts like this can get you a long way. Learning to do very small things. Again, they don't have to necessarily automate the entire process of rigging, but if every single time you need to connect things together and reconnect them in the similar ways, then writing little scripts like this, little functions, can help a lot. That's how we're going to deal with putting the finite controls on each joint, is we're going to write a little script to handle that and just run the function on each joint. So now that we essentially have the eyes connected up, I'm going to finish off the bottom one, and we're going to come back, and at that point we're going to do the jawbone, get the jawbone working, and add the finite controls. And at that point it's pretty much complete outside of going in and tweaking all the skinning and making sure that it's the skin weights are set up really nicely and working exactly the way we want, so we won't have the top lip affecting the bottom lip and everything.